All of our major cities expecting at least some light rainfall. We'll see a little bit of moderate over in Nanchang. Does it for me today. Thanks for watching. Up next is your city forecast. Bye.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
U.S. media have reported that the White House will invite President Xi to a meeting to be held in Florida in April. Although there is no official confirmation yet, there are high hopes for the proposed summit. Can it provide lasting solutions to security and economic cooperation between the two countries? U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is traveling to Japan, Seoul and Beijing. He said in Tokyo on Thursday that a different approach is required after 20 years of diplomacy had failed to prevent North Korea from developing nuclear weapons.
Let me be very clear. The policy of strategic patience has ended. We're exploring a new range of diplomatic, security, and economic measures. All options are on the table.
What will a different approach mean for future policy? Tensions on the peninsula are ramping up. Pyongyang refuses to halt its nuclear and missile activities. Seoul is actively deploying THAAD, and Washington, with no new solutions to reach their goal, are putting more blame on China. What will it take to resolve the crisis and guarantee peace in the region? Former U.S. Secretary of Defense William Perry said in his new book, My Journey at the Nuclear Brink, that nuclear weapons no longer provide for our security, they now endanger it. The White House released its budget blueprint this month to significantly increase the defense budget by $54 billion. Why is it so radically expanding military spending?
U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has begun his Asia tour with visits to Japan, South Korea and China. With tensions arising because of the DPRK's nuclear program and THAAD deployment, Tillerson's Asia tour will set the stage for both the tone and the tactics of a possible future cooperation in the region. In Beijing, he will also prepare for the meeting of President Xi and Trump, where the approach to Asia-Pacific security and China-U.S. relations will be established. To discuss these issues and more, today I'm happy to be joined in the studio by former U.S. Secretary of Defense William Perry.
Asia-Pacific region has had an unprecedented period of peace and security for the last 5 decades. And that's led to the opportunity for amazing economic development in the region. But that peace and security is now being threatened by a crisis on the Korean Peninsula.
And the president of the China Institute of International Studies, Dr. Su Ge.
U.S. and China have one of the most important relationships in the world, and peace and security in Asia-Pacific face the best interests of both countries.
That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Welcome to our discussion here, gentlemen. Dr. Perry, right after your Secretary of Defense came over to visit the allies of South Korea and Japan, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is coming to China. On the surface, his visit aims to lay groundwork for the summit meeting in Florida in April. But I'm wondering, Dr. Perry, if he is also here to address concerns about the tensions in the Korean Peninsula. First of all, do you believe hostilities are coming and war clouds are gathering very quickly?
I do not believe a war is coming on the Korean Peninsula, but still we have to take the danger there quite seriously.
You mean all options are on the table?
That's a common political phrase which doesn't mean very much. But I think it's very clear that whether or not Secretary Tillerson is here to discuss the Korean crisis, it will be possible for him to avoid it. So that's certainly going to be a part of the discussions.
Dr. Perry gives us a note of an optimistic sentiment, but I wonder if you agree with him.
When we say that, I think I agree with Dr. Perry. When we say that all options are on the table, well, it contains many meanings. It could mean to the North Koreans that if you don't behave, then we are going to think something otherwise. Well, as a Chinese watcher, and my question is that North Koreans and the Americans and the South Koreans, they were just like two speed-up trains on the same rail, rushing toward each other.
You mean they are on a collision course?
Yeah, we are afraid that there might be a collision. They are on a collision course and might be a head-on crash. So the question is, are you ready for that? And for China, we hope that this would be could be avoided. And as Minister Wang Yi said, China, we are willing to work as a switchman so that the two trains would avoid head-on.
Dr. Perry, I think Dr. Su Ge was talking about what Foreign Minister Wang Yi said at the recently concluded press conference during the annual plenary sessions of Liang Hui, what we call the NPC and CPPCC seasons. Foreign Minister Wang Yi said the DPRK should immediately suspend its nuclear and missile tests, and in return for this, the United States and South Korea should stop their joint military maneuvers, the largest of its kind in our living memory. He says this is the synchronized moves by the two parties in the game. However, neither side, the DPRK or the US and its allies, would pay any attention to our suggestions. It means, from my perspective, Dr. Perry, China could no longer exercise sufficient influence on the process in the Korean Peninsula. Do you share my pessimism?
I think China's role in this crisis in the DPRK is very, very important. The key, in my mind, the key to success here is for China and the United States to work together on this. Perhaps when Secretary Tillerson is here, that will be one of the items of discussion. We have to find, first of all, U.S. and China have to agree on what the danger is, what the threat is. And on agreeing to that, maybe they can arrive at a common strategy for how to deal with that threat. That's never happened. It did not happen in the six-party talks, which is a shame because I think that's one of the reasons the six-party talks failed. China and the United States had to get on the same page on this.
Yeah. Well, we are in the same boat in addressing the danger of nuclear proliferation in the divided Korean Peninsula, but I'm afraid we are not on the page. It's the same page.
No.
I wonder why you were the Secretary of Defense, because you sound like a pacifist messenger, and you don't talk about the gunboat policy, which is being used by President Trump and his team in Northeast Asia.
Well, being Secretary of Defense, I have a very clear picture of what kind of a catastrophe would occur if we have a military conflict on the Korean Peninsula. It would be a catastrophe for the Korean people, both in the North and the South. And all of our diplomacy should be focused on what can we do to keep that catastrophe from happening.
Dr. Su Ge, don't you think what Dr. Perry says is a wishful thinking, and the logic of the geopolitical rivalry in Northeast Asia may not necessarily follow his wishful thinking, and we're going to foresee very nasty hostilities?
Well, I wouldn't call it a wishful thinking. I would say that according to a very ancient Chinese saying, those best generals may not want to stage wars. They want to prevent wars.
Because there will be no winners in the war.
There will be no winners, because there are no atrocities of wars. That being said, I think I agree with Dr. Perry that United States and China needs to come to the table and put all their thoughts on the table, and we can brainstorm. For instance, in my opinion, China and United States, we have lots of convergence of national interests in seeking a peaceful solution. For instance, denuclearization of the peninsula fits the interests of both China and United States.
And Korea.
Yeah, and Korea.
Koreas,
And
yes.
peace stability fits all the South and the North Koreas, and fits the United States, and fits China. And then how to realize that end? Our suggestion is through diplomatic means. So that would also fit all the people, the countries, players of international relations in this region.
Look, gentlemen, many observers are trying very hard to figure out what's going to happen next, tomorrow in the Korean Peninsula. Some would say, no, it won't be a nuclear disaster, because if the DPRK were to use a nuclear arsenal, that will automatically amount to suicide.
Yeah.
The retaliation from the United States would be immense, would be unthinkable. But what do you think is the real threat? Do you think a nuclear arms race or a regime that spins out of control may go to extremes, using nuclear weapons as a blackmail? What do you think should be the worst-case scenario in the foreseeable future?
It seems clear to me that North Korea is pursuing the nuclear weapons to bolster their security, to protect the regime, to keep the regime in power. And they
Is that because we failed to provide this regime with the security assurance?
They see a danger, they see a threat from the United States. I think they misstate that. I think they misunderstand that, but that's what they see. And we have to understand what they're thinking. I once said that we have to deal with North Korea as it is and not as we would wish it to be.
But I'm afraid President Trump and his team say loud and clear they are quickly losing the strategic patience.
I agree with them in that regard, that the strategic patience has proven to be an ineffective policy.
But time is running out
so I think
for
it's
the
time
DPRK.
to replace that policy.
Time is running out for the DPRK.
It is, yes.
Do you think war is on the table?
I do
as an
not
option?
think war is on the table. I
You
do
don't
not
think
think
so?
the United States will start a war, and I don't think North Korea has any interest in starting a war. They use their nuclear weapons as a threat, but once they use a nuclear weapon, their usefulness has gone away. So they will not deliberately and consciously plan to use nuclear weapons.
Dr. Suge, here is what Susan Thornton says recently. She is the acting Assistant Secretary for East Asian and Pacific Affairs at the U.S. State Department. Yeah. She says that the United States would be looking for a results-oriented relationship with China. What does results-oriented relationship actually mean here?
Well, Susan is a senior, seasoned diplomat and a good friend, and the translation of her name into Chinese is very poetic. It's like a cloud outfit. But anyway, that being said, I will say that result-oriented, I have no problem with that. Well, and also in China-U.S. relations, we very often it's the Chinese side who want to put a general framework, how we can describe generally about the relationship, whether it's a cooperative, whether it's a strategic partnership, or we are interested in that. But the U.S. side would always, very often, they want specific things done, like the result-oriented. I think that Susan, this time of the year, she mentioned this shortly before Tillerson's visit to China, before the summit meeting, and there is a meaning in it. And for instance,
was
when
you
we talk about
saying
the
obviously the
Korean
United States
issue.
expects to have a tangible outcome coming out of the summit meeting. Now, they would refuse to use pivot to Asia, the wording by Secretary Clinton.
Yeah.
But what they do now is still viewed as a strategic reassurance.
Yeah.
Look, we want to have a tangible outcome, results-oriented, whatever it is. But you briefed me about deliverables.
Yeah, the six-party talks we entered into with high hopes and with good intentions. But what were the results? The result where North Korea ends up with a nuclear arsenal. So we want a different result. We want to focus on not just good ideas and good intentions when we enter into discussions, but discussions which have results, which get rid of the danger of the nuclear program in North Korea.
Results-oriented relationship is a natural extension of President Trump's logic as a businessman.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me the deliverables, all right? I'll maximize the profits of the United States, putting America first. That's his campaign slogan. Now, what do you think will be the major issues on the agenda between President Trump and his Chinese counterpart in Florida next month?
Well, certainly a key issue is going to be the crisis on the Korean Peninsula. The result there is to reduce that crisis, to eliminate the danger of war there. So we should focus on that result.
And your take?
Yeah, the result, I agree, quite agree with that. But then we need to have different results. There is a time frame. Certain things you can have results right there. Certain things we need a process. For the Korean Peninsula, sometimes the results may not be that easy to be generated. I remember during the campaign, President, well, then President, it was a presidential candidate, Trump. He said that, well, I wouldn't mind talking about this issue with the North Korean leaders and over a hamburger.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering whether a result would be generated out from the easy talk over, over a hamburger. But now it seems that things are much more complicated. And what I would have in mind is that we should not lose hope. Things are difficult because the North Korean issue has been an issue generated out from the combination of both the cold and the hot wars. It's just like what the Chinese saying has to say. If you have a piece of ice 3 feet deep, it takes a while for it to be thawed. Yeah. So I think that we need to compare notes and just focus on the agenda and keep the denuclearization in mind, and finally we'll keep the process in a steady way, comprehensive and verifiable, irreversible. That was the principles the United States and China and some other parties agreed upon.
Yeah.
And
okay, thank you very much. You're watching Dialogue with Dr. William Perry, former Secretary of Defense during the Clinton administration, and Dr. Su Ge, President of the China Institute of International Studies. We are addressing issues like escalation of tensions in the Korean Peninsula, as well as agenda for President Xi Jinping to meet with his American counterpart in Florida, as scheduled by the White House. I'll see you after a short break. Stay with us, please.
CGTN shows you more, providing a fresh global voice you can trust.
And a different look at the world you won't find anywhere else.
We offer unparalleled coverage of Asia, Africa, and Latin America.
We present diverse perspectives on news and newsmakers from around the world.
We want to engage our viewers with stories that represent the complete picture.
We want to share with you ideas that matter to us all.
The stories, the people, the issues.
A new and balanced perspective.
CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. Dr. Perry, you were an eyewitness of the Bosnia-Herzegovina war in the 1990s. When we look at what's going to happen in Northeast Asia, let's go back to the period of the eastward expansion of the NATO. Looking back with hindsight wisdom, what can you tell us about something that could have taken place as a reward in a favorable perspective?
The Eastern European nations back in that time era, the Eastern European nations were wanted to become a part of Western security. They wanted to get out of what used to be the Soviet bloc. And so they thought the way to do that was to become members of NATO. I sympathized with their views, but I felt that the move was premature because we were also trying to establish positive, constructive relations with Russia. And that was going very well, but we weren't there yet. So I wanted to wait a few more years until we had Russia comfortable with NATO before we started bringing other members in. So I think it was a mistake to move as quickly as we did on the NATO expansion, and it was part of the reasons, one of the first reasons, in fact, that started to drive the U.S. and Russia apart. Prior to that point, we had very close and very cordial relations with Russia, including having a Russian brigade working as part of an American division in the Bosnian peace enforcement operation.
What was the driving force behind the eastward enlargement of the NATO in those days?
There was never a schedule set up for it. My view, though, was that the schedule should be based on the closer relationship to Russia to the West, a closer relationship to Russia with the United States and NATO. And that hadn't happened yet, so I thought we were moving prematurely.
And do you think the annexation of Crimea by President Putin was, in fact, a natural development of the eastward expansion? It's a robust rebound against the eastward enlargement of NATO because, you know, both NATO and Russia would naturally seek a sphere of influence or a buffer zone so that they would head off a collision.
I think it was an opportunistic move on the part of President Putin. He saw a chance to do it, and he did it. I don't think it was particularly related to the NATO issue at that time. His concern with NATO was more concerned with Georgia, which was wanting to become a member of NATO, and he would have considered that to be a very significant
Ukraine also
move.
wanted to become a member of the NATO.
Yes, Ukraine also wanted to become a member of NATO. Not all Ukrainians did, but the Ukrainian government at the time did. So that was an issue in Ukraine. It would have been immensely premature in my mind to move forward with Ukraine. I'm not sure it ever made sense to have Ukraine as a member of NATO.
Do you think President Putin is facing a U-turn in his fortune regarding the relationship with NATO, given the rise of the far-right movement, particularly radicals in the French election, who said once they were to be elected into office, one of the first things they're going to do is to end the economic sanctions against Russia following the takeover of Crimea. Do you think Russia is facing a good opportunity?
Well, the international situation, both on the world stage and in Europe, are facing tremendous changes. Well, when you look at NATO, as the Secretary of State Perry said that there was a period of NATO expansion, but that when I see this, I would think that if you put yourself in somebody else's shoes, then you will understand why there had been so
most of the time they were talking past
Russian
each other instead of talking to each other.
Yeah, we have to understand why the Russians would react that drastically, because the United States is a country. You are flanked by Canada and Mexico.
And the
you
two big oceans.
And two big oceans, and you do not have really a danger threatening your national security. For the Russians, you have to understand their national security quest and their sense of insecurity. When you expand the NATO closer, and then first and then further to the east, the Russians are feeling that you are having all these outposts, maybe hostile towards them. And so you have to understand. Another, with regards to Crimea, I would like to add a little something. Historically speaking, when Khrushchev was happy at the 200-year anniversary of Ukraine, he said, well, I would like to give this republic a present, a gift, that is Crimea. So now when Putin says we welcome Crimea to the embrace of her motherland, so there is a little history in it. So what is done is done. So I doubt whether you can expect the Russians to return this to Ukraine. So we have to be realistic.
Your description of the American exceptionalism, which means he's in essence the country protected by two big oceans and two weak neighbors, Canada and Mexico, that may be outdated if you look at the development of intercontinental ballistic missiles by major nuclear-armed countries, Russia, China. Well, we don't target the United States geopolitically. However, other rogue states, quote-unquote, by President Bush, might do that. For example, the DPRK. And do you think the proliferation of WMD will be the public enemy number one for the national security?
I do agree with that.
You do agree?
Proliferation of weapons of mass destruction is the danger. The United States does not really feel secure because of its oceans today, because, as you point out, we have other nations have long-range missiles which fly over the oceans. So the oceans are not really that kind of a protection today as they were a century ago. But we have to be more concerned, I think, with the dangers of nuclear proliferation and dangers of nuclear terrorism. That's a danger, by the way, to Russia and the United States, and for that matter to China. And so we ought to find a way of working together, our three countries, to prevent proliferation and to prevent nuclear terrorism.
A warfare could also be taking place on other two major fronts. One is the outer space and the other cyber warfare. Do you think these are the most important areas where friction or even hostility could take place?
The cyber warfare, I don't think of in terms of part of a general war. I think as a part of an irregular war, which can be used not only by one nation against another, but more importantly, I think, by non-state actors against both the United States and Russia, against both the United States and China.
But China was accused by predecessors of President Trump of undertaking cyber espionage. That means, of course, not friendly, and it could be hostile. Now, a question for both of you, gentlemen, is what do you think should be the most important measures in the evolution of a military strategy in the 21st century? China is modernizing its blue water navy, so to speak, and that's viewed as a threat to the American maritime primacy in the West Pacific. Now, tell me, Dr. Perry, what do you think is the most meaningful and most important part in theory building of military strategy?
Generals and admirals always tend to fight the last war. And so when China builds its blue water navy, it's thinking in terms of World War II battles. I think the real military strength, the real military effectiveness is going to lie on other dimensions altogether, cyber being one of them, space being one of them. Large navies steaming over the oceans are not going to be that decisive, I believe, in the future.
And Dr. Suga, do you think the construction of aircraft carriers might be an outdated notion for the military build-up because they could become floating targets for the missiles?
Well, aircraft carriers development into the space, Star Wars, these are all new developments in military strategy and practices. That reminds me of the whole development of human history. Well, starting from ancient times, in a sense, the struggle between the development of the spear and development of the shield. That's ancient weaponry. You have a shield and I have a spear. Each want to develop it to the utmost stage. So the nowadays, even in when we talk about the Korean Peninsula, and you find the situation that each side is feeling insecure. For instance, the South are saying that now in the North you develop the nuclear weapons and the missiles. We have to develop our shield. There is the so-called deployment of the THAAD. Well, that creates a new problem. That is the THAAD, although the deployment, the rockets, the missiles are not going to cover even so, but the X-band radar is going to sap some of the defense capabilities or security interests of both China and the Russians. So then it gives them a reason to develop their skills to penetrate the radar capabilities.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your description of the typical security dilemma in Northeast Asia, whether China's vow not to forge a military alliance, instead of we prefer to have a partnership, that's viewed by China as a solution to this sort of a security dilemma. We'll continue to discuss this and other issues. Until then, goodbye.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello, you're watching The World Today from CGTN. I'm Jeff Moody in Beijing. The Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has hailed the progress China and the United States have made in their bilateral relations